Welcome to our video discussion on data security and privacy. Over a period of weeks, my colleagues and I have had the opportunity to look into various aspects of data and the issues surrounding data in our world today. Over this time span, we have asked a wide array of random individuals, varying educational levels and age, what they know and don't know about data security and privacy aspects and how they are related to data. Through asking these individuals, we collected a range of common questions that we believe people should know and understand and be informed about. Today, we will be answering and discussing those questions over the course of this video. However, before we begin, we feel it is best to introduce ourselves. I'm Ashley. I'm a sophomore and finance major in the Stillman School of Business, one of us three at Seton Hall University.
I'm Peter. I'm a junior at Seton Hall University, and I'm majoring in mathematical finance and IT management.
And I'm Arthur Adriano, and I'm a junior political science major with a minor in legal studies and business.
To start out, it is best to begin with the most common and most important question. That being, what is data? Well, Cambridge University defines data as any information or raw input that when processed or arranged makes a meaningful output. This is a very basic definition of data. However, data essentially is the learned information on anything that can be used to make some conclusion.
Many individuals also question why we were asking questions concerning this topic, often inquiring, why should I have to know about data, or why does this relate to my life?
Well, this topic is important because everyone in today's world should have some knowledge about data. This is because data as a whole has entered into most everyday tasks in the form of data collection, or gathering information that was previously discussed is one of, if not the most important activity in businesses are taking part in today. Businesses are collecting users and customers' data within everything, and many individuals aren't even aware of this.
Well, how is it affecting our home life other than phones and laptops?
Well, with the rise of the Internet of Things, which is commonly referred to as IoT, in short, is connecting any common appliance from our doorbell to our vacuum, the internet, thus giving it the ability to transmit data to each other.
Exactly. Most individuals have some start to IoT within their home, but many don't really even realize it. This is as we found that most people have some type of smart device. These range from smart speakers such as Amazon Alexa or Google Home, the Ring doorbell, which is a smart doorbell, and a Nest thermostat, which is again a smart product, as well as lights and door locks that can be controlled via an app and many other examples. Yet, the issue that arises here in this situation is that most don't realize or understand the privacy and security issues that come as a result of this technology, as people only enjoy the ease and the wow factor that it brings them.
This, we found, was often the moment people really went and began to be more interested in the conversation. This is because people want these devices, but they do not want their privacy to be infringed upon. Here, individuals would ask, what privacy issues? Or how does my specific device have security issues?
First, let's take the Amazon Alexa, which was a common device. There are many issues within Alexa and smart speakers today. For instance, people back in May, after a CNET investigation, became aware that Amazon does not fully remove users' personal data from the device, even after the user deletes it from the device. The company later came out saying that they do keep the data until the audio is deleted. However, some of this information upon deletion is kept in the form of text transcripts and are not fully removed. Amazon claims this is because the company has to scrub the data from various parts of its global data storage systems, or that in some cases, Amazon chooses to hold on to the data without telling the user. This is because Amazon devices could be hindered by the data being deleted, or because it could be analyzed to greater improve Alexa's machine learning. So, regardless if you agree with it or not, Amazon may know what you're asking your device what to do.
Another device is the Ring doorbell, a home security smart home device owned by Amazon that allows users to answer the door from anywhere using your iOS or Android smartphone through a built-in app connected to the doorbell security camera. This device is also under a lot of scrutiny as the users don't own their video footage data like one would assume. This issue arose as individuals uncovered that Amazon's TV advertisement used actual security footage from users' personal devices. The Amazon company collected pictures of individuals' faces and posted them in conjunction with the accusations that they were guilty of a crime, all without asking the person pictured or the owners of the cameras. They technically, according to the terms of service, have the licenses to have an unlimited, irrevocable, fully paid, royalty-free, perpetual, worldwide right to reuse, distribute, store, delete, translate, copy, modify, display, sell, create derivative works in relation to the footage taken from your front door. This means that Amazon will have access to see who and when anyone or thing comes to your front door.
Now, even though many had some sort of these home devices, we did encounter those with none. However, this does not mean that they have not fallen victim to data collection, mind you, in their everyday life, because they had. So what else intakes data besides home accessories? So another home source of technology that companies are using within our lives to collect data comes in the form of wearables, in which this term to many people have never heard of. But essentially, a wearable is any electronic device that is meant to be worn on the person's body. These technologies are gaining popularity, taking on various forms. Some of these include smartwatches like the Apple Watch, fitness trackers such as Fitbit, as well as many more complex products, including the Google Glass, Microsoft HoloLens, and Starkey's Livio IA hearing aids.
Again, we come across the question of how these specific products impede on our privacy today. Well, the most common wearable currently are smartwatches and Fitbit trackers, as 1 in 6 adults now own a smartwatch.
And the number is increasing.
Exactly, and this number is increasing. This is because technologies are incredible, and they are allowing for many positive things for individuals. However, these wearables, which are meant to monitor heart rate, calories, and track users' running route, cause privacy concerns, as companies such as Amazon are essentially feeding off the intimate information that they are gathering.
For instance, this information is as intimate as one's sleeping habits or salt levels in one's sweat, and can eventually be used against customers.
One individual asked the important question concerning this issue, that being, don't positive applications outweigh the negative?
Well, this answer is complicated. This is because, yes, there are many positives from these devices, as again, they are incredible. And for instance, with the health features such as fitness and heart rate monitoring, or having a personal ECG on one's wrist, has many life-changing altercations. However, there are so many positives that can branch off from this. Yet, what happens when the company uses one's health information negatively? Well, in the future, we are looking towards insurance companies requiring access to fitness trackers' data, which leads to increasing insurance rates or lack of eligibility for healthcare.
But people often think that we have plenty of time and that we don't need to worry about that yet.
Exactly, but no, people should be informed today. These aren't maybes. Juniper already estimates that by 2023, there will be a total of $855 million in revenue of health data sharing, and this is only the medical field. But many individuals claim that they could just not use data collecting devices.
And, the answer to that is both yes and no. Individuals, if they want to protect their data, would steer clear from the IoT in their home devices, such as Alexa or Echo products and all that sort. But in today's world, that's very difficult to have a small data footprint, as everything that we interact with collects data.
This is true. An example is navigation apps. More than 90% of US consumers ages 50 or younger use map apps. Google Maps, being one of the most well-known, is the most used and most popular app that people are aware of. Google Maps does more than tell individuals traffic conditions and what roads to take, as the application collects the user's app information and learns a lot about them. For instance, Google knows an individual's personal information, such as their home address, their favorite shopping locations, who their employer is, as well as their child's age range, based on what school they dropped them off at.
Following learning about this, many asked if companies actually had the right to do this. The answer is technically yes, as there aren't many regulations on data collection today. However, this doesn't make it ethical. Companies' use of this data collection are acting in an unethical manner due to the fact that most, like the individuals we have asked, little to no knowledge on the real lack of privacy that they themselves are experiencing.
Exactly. This is because companies are clever and hide this information in the long and drawn-out terms and agreements that no individual reads, and even if it's read, no one is able to comprehend it because of the complex legal terminology.
Right, but so what can individuals do to protect themselves? Well, individuals should be well informed on what the companies behind the technology they are purchasing say and do when it concerns their customers' privacy. They should avoid purchasing products they feel they have no real way to protect themselves from the companies who are infiltrating all of their personal data.
Individuals should look at their privacy settings to try and keep themselves secure at a basic company level. They can also learn through various outlets how to encrypt their data that is harbored within their own devices.
I agree, but privacy doesn't stop at the individual level. Before we gather information on this topic, companies have always been collecting data on our personal lives, which means that our data is already out there and it can't even be erased anymore. So our conversation so far has been how to prevent any additional data from being given without consent. But how do we actually protect our data that has already been exposed by businesses? And more importantly, why do companies care so much about data? The most important reason is that businesses want to collect data for its efficiency. If you collect data, you're an efficient company. If they're able to understand that, they're able to understand your identity, which would mean they'll be able to understand their target market and parallel their interests to their consumers. This comes with a deficit to consumers because in return, they are not given any type of compensation in signing away their rights in terms of agreement.
Exactly. And on top of that, the data that is being collected by businesses is meant to be used in a way that keeps the data strictly between the business and the consumer. And this, in the right hands and with the right consent, data collection is a very effective tool and used to accurately analyze your wants and needs without worry. However, we do not live in that world. As the IoT continues to increase the amount of data collected on our community, so should the security behind keeping the data to its intended role.
So how can businesses ensure that the data they're collecting is protected for its intended role?
This is by using updating encryption methods on the data that is being distributed between the business and the consumer. As technology continues to become quicker and faster, so should the strength of data security.
The role that encryption plays in today's world is phenomenal. And the craziest part about it is that people don't even know that the importance of it until their data is used against them. The reason encryption exists in our world is to create a barrier in between to secure your privacy on the internet. Encryption varies in complexity and type, where the most universal form of encryption could be a password. When it comes to sensitive data, however, a password isn't enough to make the customer feel safe, which is why we resort to mathematical formulas called one-way functions to properly encrypt our outsourcing data, namely RSA encryption.
And how do these functions establish valid encryptions?
Well, the analogy that best describes it is by creating a mess. If you wanted to create a mess, it's really easy to just throw your clothes on the floor. But taking those clothes up and then refolding them would be a lot more difficult. RSA encryption works in the same way, where you multiply two prime numbers to get a sum. And it's really easy to know which two prime numbers you multiply to get the sum, but in order to reverse it to find the two prime numbers, it's a lot more difficult. Well, if I gave you the number 35, it's a lot easier, because you know that 35 is 7 times 5. But what if the number is actually 716 digits long?
That's a lot of work to keep someone from accessing your information.
Precisely. That's why RSA encryption is used on sensitive data such as credit card information, addresses, and even passwords.
Does it work for other type of identifications like biometrics and wearables?
RSA encryption works for any type of data transmission. The only thing required is knowledge about it. The reason why I stress the importance of this is because biometrics are starting to become a common method for unlocking devices. And that's terrifying because without proper security on our biometrics, we would be putting invaluable information on ourselves to stay in company databases. And who can honestly say that they're comfortable knowing that their facial and fingerprint scans are sitting somewhere waiting to be breached?
Not only are the biometrics at risk, but because of the exponential success in AI and machine learning, scientists have been able to use brain monitoring devices called EEGs to track electric signals in the brain and distinguish thoughts by seeing the patterns of brain activity that occur when thinking about objects such as a square, a circle, or even a number. So that means that scientists will eventually be able to record what we are thinking without even blinking.
Right. And with the technology that has already been tracking us, we can all agree that privacy and security of extremely sensitive information is going to need some revamping in order to properly adapt to the technological future. I mean, some of this stuff could completely restructure the way that we view the world.
If biometrics are going to break the final barrier between human privacy, then the ethics of the technology are going to be put in question. Using user data for predictive analytics is one thing, but even that doesn't cross the line that personal.
Also, with the ability to practically read minds, it could definitely alter the procedures in government as well. For example, the First Amendment is commonly known as the right to free speech. Once we factor in the brain reading tech, would that really imply we have the right to free thought? Would the government be able to use people's thoughts as evidence against them? Probably not, because some people think certain thoughts but don't act on them.
I think those answers can't be understood and definitively answered today. The truth is the matter is that these possibilities are all under development and cannot be pinpointed when these advancements would hit that mark. The best thing that we can do today is try to understand that these topics as best as we can and hope that we stay ahead of this curve in the future.
With the increasing speed of technology, that's eventually going to be hard to do. We are starting to see these effects in regulation for these ideas, especially in government.
The reasons for this is that because of the reoccurring theme of uncertainty, without any sort of knowledge, you cannot expect to be able to understand how these technologies work in order to regulate them. And by the time we do learn, the newest update is already introduced.
These advances in technology are basically just updates to new ideas, like a computer updates itself to fix its flaws.
Well, if every update was to have its flaws, then how can we get technological regulation right the first time? Many people say that we only have one shot to get this right. So how is that possible if every invention has its vulnerabilities and has to be fixed?
Well, given that the vulnerabilities are inevitable, I would say that the proper foundation of encryption is the first step in keeping our private information intact and away from hackers.
And that's what they're already implementing in the EU with the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, requiring that every data that is sent out within the EU has to have a standard regulation of encryption. Now, it may not be as strong as RSA 2048 encryption, but it did significantly reduce the amount of data breaches in 2018 in Europe.
If you really think about it, the people in the best position of correctly pioneering the next industrial revolution are the people who understand this technology and who knows more about this technology than hackers.
I agree. If you're able to manipulate technology for personal gain, you must understand it enough to know how important security really is. In 2018 alone, files were breached, leading to various incriminations of billions of people from famous companies, some of which include the Marriott and Adhar. So, why don't we hear about this stuff in the US?
Well, despite the US being a superpower, its focus isn't really shifted towards data protection. It's evident in the courts due to the astonishing questions of government to the lack of media coverage for important breaches like Adhar. It's no wonder that almost 50% of all the files breached in 2018 were from the US alone. After the EU implemented the GDPR in 2016, the percentage of total files breached in Europe for 2018 was almost 0.5%. The magnitude and difference is astonishing, which shows how effective just a little attention could go.
And hackers are starting to get smarter. Last year, a virus called CamuBot was able to bypass biometric data to access private client information, including addresses, passwords, and financial information using social media pictures. Disguised as the bank's logo, the bot was able to perform some social engineering, tricking clients into giving up their financials.
Again, that leads back to being prepared for attacks through knowledge on them. Looking forward, we need to predict what directions technology would take and take the necessary action to get it right as much as we can on the first try, and stay ahead of the hackers and other types of social engineering.
So, what are some rumored technologies that have the potential to change our world as we know it?
The two most revolutionary technologies in our time are probably going to be Google's Project Soli and quantum computing. In a nutshell, Google's Project Soli is an invention by Google that allows you to interact with your wearables with minimal hand gestures. By mimicking your gestures as a scroll, a click, or an unlocking gesture, it is probable that people will be interacting with your devices without actually touching them.
Right, and with sensors tracking your hand movement, your hand could be a virtual tool acting as a virtual platform simultaneously.
Along with the combination of AI and learning's abilities, big data's information, cloud computing storage, and IoT's size, Project Soli will fit right in with the rest of the technologies. Eventually, we will reach a technology capable of leaving your device and projecting it in the air like holograms.
And that's only for the first topic. When it comes to quantum computing, current supercomputers are blown out of the water by a quantum computer in terms of speed and capability. This is because quantum computing strays from traditional computer.
Well, how does quantum computing differ from traditional computing?
Well, in traditional computing, everyone knows that computers talk in languages of zeros and ones, which is a binary language. But before, when I was talking about RSA encryption, I mentioned that it was a 2048 bit, which means there was 2048 combinations of zeros and ones in that RSA encryption. But so far, we have only been using zeros or ones. In quantum computing, it gets a bit tricky. In quantum computing, the bit is actually called a qubit, and it's a photon that actually is simultaneously both in 0 and 1 at the same time. This is a revolutionary concept called superposition, and it only exists in the quantum world. The best analogy to explain this is a penny. When you flip a penny, it could either be a heads or a tails. And everyone knows that. That's how traditional computing works. But in quantum computing, let's say you took the penny and you spun it. Could you guess if it's heads or tails? It's not. It's both heads and tails at the same time.
So does that mean that when a quantum computer is calculating something, its input for every qubit is simultaneously a 1 and a 0?
Yeah, that's right. That's what makes quantum computing incredibly efficient. In fact, quantum computing is so efficient that while a regular computer takes millennia to break RSA encryption, the quantum computer can break it in a mere time of only minutes.
So, what are some other applications for a quantum computer?
For one, quantum computers could be useful for running simulations in nature. So now nature as itself was unsolvable, but now with quantum computing, we're able to make it almost predictive. Also, it could crack any form of encryption in today's world within minutes. It's both a terrifying machine and the most helpful one we've made so far.
We already had discussed the interaction of individuals in the community at large with data and securing privacy. But we can't forget, however, that the government plays a key part in all of our lives. It is there to provide security and stability for our society. Yeah, it always hasn't done such a great job, but it has had its moments. I think the governments of the world, the US being chief among them, are facing major learning curves right now. And I do think that the European Union is doing quite well. It has had a stable foundation when it comes to data and privacy protection that many nations could probably learn a thing or two from.
Speaking of Europe, let's go back to a previous topic and talk about the GDPR for a second.
Well, EUGDPR.com helps provide an understanding of what is the GDPR, which stands for the General Data Protection Regulations. It is an unprecedented uniform regulation on data protection that is enforced throughout the entire European Union.
An important aspect to the GDPR is that it focuses on overall protection for people to have control over their personal data. Many laws previously governed data protection were written before the internet was even a thing, and companies like Google and Facebook were exploiting its loopholes and the data they were collecting.
I think it is also important that it doesn't cut off businesses from accessing data, but that it at least allows everyone to have some level playing field. This shows that we can be in a relationship with businesses and give them access to some of our data, control the needs to what happens, but hopefully this is a step in the right direction for other nations to work towards.
Speaking of other nations, how will this affect the UK since Brexit is eventually going to happen?
Well, the UK will still have to adhere to the GDPR since they were still in the European Union when the regulations were implemented.
And businesses in the UK will still have to comply if they are handling data from the residents.
So how does the US government have strict laws protecting privacy?
So yes, there are certain broad federal statutes that Congress has enacted, such as HIPAA. But what's interesting to know is that states have started to introduce their own legislation, and some of these legislations either broaden the scope of what the federal law protects, or in fact can actually be more strict than what Congress has passed, such as in California, they recently passed the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, which is due to take effect in January of 2020.
So what do those mean and do?
HIPAA is the federal protection of patient medical information. So essentially, it provides a set standard that medical providers must adhere to in order to release your medical records. So it requires that you have to give consent to specific information that they're allowed to give.
So we're talking about biometrics a little bit ago, and I think it will be interesting to see how HIPAA and the state law will come into play and should disclose what of our health information will be disclosed.
Absolutely. And continuing off of Peter's question, the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 is essentially the closest the United States has gotten to the GDPR. This California statute essentially establishes a set layer of transparency between businesses and the consumer. The consumer is able to have certain rights and demand of certain performances of the business. Sometimes you can ask a business to delete info or release what info was collected from the consumer.
Wow. It is interesting to note that the US has an interesting approach to protection of data.
Well, that's certainly true. The US takes on data protection as content specific in expectation to California's law. So, in other words, the US protection of data material and specific circumstances for data disclosures and privacy can only be breached under controlled measures.
So since the US doesn't have broad data protection, how good a job is the country doing to ensure our data and privacy is being protected?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. Simple answer is they always don't do a great job. This content-specific and circumstance-specific approach that the U.S. has taken has begun to expose its flaws. The ACLU and many other advocacy groups are currently in litigation across different state and federal courts for breaches of security.
Well, it's not just the government that is invading our privacy. We have had big businesses and corporations that have always been a problem.
Oh yeah, the mainstream discussions about Google, Amazon, and Facebook recently. It's becoming more and more apparent that these companies are finding loopholes in these aging laws. I think it's actually good to see that the government is starting to put in attention into reining them, but I don't know how effective they will ultimately be.
Well, yeah, I think it's a multi-sided approach. We need more people that have at least some understanding of the technology and data to become next lawmakers. I think it also requires people to be aware of what they're sharing and providing these giants with their information. This is what has made our research so important, and why more people, not just students like us, should be more aware of the issues.
I now wonder if lawmakers aren't doing their job, what can we turn to?
You're absolutely right. For quite some time into the future, I don't think it's going to be the legislatures of our country that will be leading the way. Already a proven leader in these issues is the court system. Federal and state courts have provided new measures of data and privacy protection through case law. The interpretations of the Constitution and enforcement of certain laws is how I think these giants, such as Facebook and Google, and their power over our information will start chipping away.
So, how can the Constitution help when it's already relatively vague? Is that not the laws that are supposed to help provide specific attention?
That is an excellent point, but it is key to remember that the Constitution has supreme power and a court decision has the same weight as a law passed by Congress until it's overruled or the Constitution itself is changed. So let's take a case now regarding Apple. Granted, Apple has been pretty good when it comes to our privacy and things like that, but in recent months, there has been a Supreme Court case referred to as Apple versus Pepper. As I understand the case, it is a case where the court was in the opinion that the respondent, the party known as Pepper, is now allowed to bring suit against Apple for antitrust violations. Basically, the grounds were that Apple has a monopoly over applications because of the fact you can only buy Apple products through the App Store and you can't use Google Play and things like that. So now the Supreme Court, in this most recent Supreme Court term, has ruled that, in fact, we can bring suit. There's a chance you can take on antitrust laws against Apple.
So, what are some parts of the Constitution that the courts use to protect privacy?
I've read that there are amendments that seem to specifically deal with privacy. Those amendments are the 1st, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 9th, and the 14th amendments. But key among them is the 14th Amendment, particularly the Equal Protection Clause, which guarantees that all citizens of the United States are protected under the law without any prejudice.
So what is your outlook on the future when it comes to government?
I think that there are those in government that are either in support of government oversight or hesitant to allow the government to overreach itself. I am pretty sure that most, however, will agree that at some point that we need the government to step in on these issues. I do support the idea that it would take some time for Congress to be in a position to do that, but the state legislatures, the courts, and even the people themselves have shown their determination to insert control over their data and how their privacy is ensured. I see a bright future where adaptation and continued research, such as our own project, will lead to a more cognizant society ready to make the change.
And we thank you all for listening and hope that you have found all of this material as to the reality of data in our society today informative. We all strongly hope that you encourage to continue to be informed in the future about how you can protect yourself and your personal data.
What if we each move our own stuff? Would that be easier or no?
I mean, I think it's bad to pass the mouse. I don't know. Well, I just mean like, are you gonna do that the whole time? Sorry.
But people often think that we have plenty of time and that we don't need to worry about that yet.
No. People should be informed today. These aren't me.
Sorry.
Sorry. I said no.
Very assertive. No.
I was like, oh my god, I believed you. I was like, absolutely not.
Because before I said something else, and this time I forgot what I said, so I just started reading what I wrote.
No.
No.
I didn't even say piece of cake.
You did.
Yeah, you got.
I did.
Yes.
100.
When you said
Give
that,
us
I
the
almost
100.
not had to laugh because you were doing so. I didn't laugh.
Is it bad if the video's like 40 minutes or instead of 20 and 20? Or is it the same
What do you mean?
file size?
Oh,
I
the
don't
file
know.
size is getting bigger.
Do you want
Just cut it, I guess.
Oh, also, wait. You guys should do it, and then I'll cut it.
Okay, ready?
Ready? And
Oh,
all right, I can do this.
Take 5. Think.
I'm pretty sure it's state 27. All right.
It's fine. Quantum computer is calculating something. It's input for every
Qubit. Yeah,
Qubit.
qubit. Sorry.
Shoot!
I forgot that one.
Qubit.
Qubit.
Ah,
Qubit.
Qubit. Okay. So does this mean that when a quantum computer is calculating something, it's input for every qubit?
Qubit. Sorry. It's done yet.
I knew I said it! as I was saying it!
Qubit. Sorry.
Okay.
Wait, I just wanna see
Qubit.
this.
Qubit. Oh my gosh.
Qubit.
I knew
HIPAA, but you know, the states have started to introduce.
I heard you say it.
My brain hurt. My brain. I'm having a stroke. It's fine. All right. So I've read that there are pretty much 6 predominant amendments in our Constitution that seem to specifically deal with privacy. The first is the first. All right, yeah. Well done, Ori. Yeah. 2nd grade math. All right. Stupid idiot. Yeah, the first one is the first one. Yeah. Good job.
I'm mad.
I swear I deserve to be in college. All right.
And we thank you all for listening and hope that you have found all of this material as to the reality of data in our society today informative. We all strongly hope that you encourage to continue to be informed in the future about how you can protect yourself and your personal data. Yes.
That was loud. Wow.
Your ears are ringing.
That was really loud.
That was good. And with a bang. Literally.
Wow, 6:45. That was a whole 3 hours left.